start writing down every quote that we
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. My name is Matthew Helmrich. I'm the director of the Tropic Cinema. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I have first one announcement from Mr. Sinclair, and that is, turn your goddamn cell phones off. Did I get that right? Lots of you, I know, have been to the Tropic before and probably seen depictions of Hemingway on the screen or interpretations of Hemingway on the screen. Tonight, you get to see the real thing. I never read speech notes, but there's so many facts and prizes about this guy that, will you forgive me if I read a couple of them? Brian Gordon Sinclair is an internationally acclaimed playwright, actor, and scholar who has, among his keen interests, legendary novelist Ernest Hemingway. He happens to look a lot like Papa too, albeit a younger, slimmer version of Papa. Hemingway nonetheless. Mr. Sinclair wrote the acclaimed 6-play series Hemingway On Stage, The Road to Freedom, which premiered here in Key West at the Hemingway Days Festival. He's been called in the British press the foremost dramatic interpreter of Ernest Hemingway in the world today. That's hard to beat. Mr. Sinclair, yes, indeed, has performed the world over from Canada to Cuba, in Eastern and Western Europe. He's won nearly as many prizes as the stages he's played, including the Sir Tyrone Guthrie Award for Acting at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival, the Finca Viaja Award of Distinction from the Museo Hemingway in Cuba, and the Canadian Studies Award Distinction at the University of Ugin in Cuba. Mr. Sinclair is not only good on stage, he's also good off stage. He is giving the entire proceeds to this evening's performance to the nonprofit Tropic Cinema. We're extremely grateful to him and to everyone, volunteers, members, friends, who support the project. Thank you.
Are you okay, hon?
And now, please give a warm welcome to Hemingway On Stage.
Are you okay?
Time for another drink. Salute! Excuse me. I just thought of something and I better write it down while I can still remember it. All those ECT treatments do something to a fella's head. Now, I am trying to make a picture of the whole world. No, I am trying to make, before I get through, a picture of the whole world. Or as much of it as I have seen, boiling it down always, rather than spreading it out thin.
Just happened right straight ahead.
All good books are truer than if they had really happened. And after you are finished reading one, you will feel that all that happened to you. The secret is that it is poetry written into prose, and it is the hardest of all things to do. It's enough for you to do it once for a few minutes to remember you, but if you do it year after year, then many people will remember. And if it's good enough, it will last as long as there are human beings. And I hope that didn't sound too damn pretentious. You see, anyone can be a writer. All you have to do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. My name is Ernest Hemingway, and I am a son of a bitch. One of the reasons I'm a son of a bitch is because on July 2nd, 1961, I will blow my brains out with a shotgun. But before that happens, I want you to understand something. I am also the son of a bitch who loves Havana. I love waking in the morning to the sun rising beside the Moro Castle. I love hearing the clatter of the ice wagons on cobblestone streets as they drip their liquid gold. The children run behind them, trying to catch a frozen diamond. The peasants are waking in the streets. Merchants are sweeping in front of their shops, and the lottery sellers are setting up their tables.
Do I just go look for a
The
seat?
fat whore has gone home. And the stringy whore is just finishing up.
I'm just
Will be
after
on
one.
her
I'll
way
take
soon.
that. Is that
All in
a
all,
seat
it
again?
was a
I'll
quiet,
take that. I'm watching it.
lousy
I'm watching it.
morning. And then, over at the bank, a gunshot. A man came running out with a gun in his hand. Two more men came out carrying leather briefcases and guns and ran in the same direction. The fourth man, a big one, came out holding a Thompson submachine gun. As he backed out of the door, the bank siren rose in a long, breath-holding shriek, and the gun muzzle jumped and jumped as he fired and fired. The man turned and ran, stopping only to shoot at a bank guard coming out the door. The bullets whacked his chest like 3 slaps. He slid down on his knees, his eyes wide, his mouth open, as if he wanted to say, it was a typical, ordinary day in Havana. Incidentally, all of that ended up in my writing. And sometimes, if people ask politely, I would help them with their writing. In the spring of 1934, Arnold Samuelson, known as the maestro because he played the violin, hitchhiked all the way from Minneapolis to meet me. He was not invited. He had read a story of mine that would later become part of the novel To Have and Have Not. And he decided that he would travel 2,000 miles to get my advice on how to become a writer. It seems that a 22-year-old tramp during the Great Depression didn't have to have much reason for what he did. Normally, I would have told him to get lost. But I had a soft spot for kid brother types. And I had a brand new boat that needed a crew. And what a boat she was. 38 feet of pure heaven on the water. A cedar and oak beauty with 2 gasoline engines that could handle any kind of weather. Fast enough to catch a school of fish or save a life if need be. And when you opened her up, she damn near planed across the water. By any standards, she was one fine fishing machine. And I did need a crew. So the maestro got a job, and he got his advice. I told him the same thing Sherwood Anderson had told me. Steal. But steal from the best, like Turgenev and Tolstoy and Chekhov, and learn how to make it your own. The best advice, though, was about the place where you do your writing. You must have a room completely your own, and your ordinary, everyday life must never be brought into it. No one, absolutely no one, not wife, not family, not even God himself, should interfere with the writer's work. I also told him not to worry about the kind of room. What difference does it make if you live in a picturesque little outhouse surrounded by 300 feeble-minded goats and your faithful dog? The question is, can you write? And of course, the maestro asked the inevitable question, do you think I will become a writer? Well, how the hell should I know, I said. Maybe you have no talent. Maybe you can't feel for other people. But you've got some good stories if you can write them. How can I tell, he asked. So I told him, just write. If you work at it for 5 years and you still find you're no good, you can just as well shoot yourself then as now. He looked shocked. I wouldn't shoot myself, he said. Well then, look me up, I said, and I'll shoot you. What I got in return for this advice was a deckhand with 4 left feet and an incurable tendency towards seasickness. I told him that it was obvious he was going to be a hell of a good writer, because he certainly wasn't worth a damn at anything else. After that, yours truly, who sometimes has an evil temper, swore never to go to sea again with an aspirant writer. If any more asshole Byron writers come on board the Pilar, they must meet 3 requirements. Let them be female, let them be very beautiful, and let them bring champagne. Say, do you have any champagne? Well, the champagne arrived, delivered personally by Jane Mason. And contrary to what some people say, my motto was not booze, boats, rods, and books. At least not in that order. Jane fit into most of those categories. Hell, Jane fit into any category. She was wealthy, she was beautiful, and she married even more wealth in the form of Grant Mason, one of the founders of a little company called Pan American Airways. Their Cuban home, Jimenitas, was a pleasure palace. It was a Cole Porter world of cocktails and smoking and late night parties and fancy dress balls. No matter what Jane wore, she always looked gorgeous. Grant just looked silly most of the time. She was married to the wrong man, and that was bad luck for herself and for her friends. Jane had friends everywhere. She had a passion for hunting and fishing, and she sure could hold her booze. I admired that. She also collected writers, the same way she collected their books. I guess that's where I came in. With my second wife, Pauline, back in Key West, and me here alone, writing in a $2 a night room at the Hotel Ambos Mundos, I was the perfect target. And then we targeted each other. Before lunch, we'd both drink plenty of daiquiris and then take off in her imported sports car. It was a cross-country chicken run. We had discovered the pure adrenaline rush of trying to scare the crap out of each other. The object was to see how long the passenger could sit there without shouting, "Look out," or "Stop." The driver was free to leave the road and head out cross-country. Ditches and thorn patches were legitimate hazards. So were cows, birds, trees, and fallen logs. Oh, an ox cart gave you an extra point, but they couldn't be smacked, only grazed. Now, if you were sitting there in the passenger seat, you'd probably look something like this. Jane was a very careful driver. She always looked both ways before hitting something. When I drove, I cheated. I took my glasses off. Hell, I was so damn nearsighted that half the time I didn't know enough to be scared. My interest in Jane died the day she almost killed my children. She was taking Jack and Patrick back to Hymenides when she swerved to avoid a bus. Now, at first, the boys thought she was playing our game. But when the car started to roll, they knew it was for real. It rolled 3 times as the kids did a strange somersault, their hands pressed forcibly against the roof of the car, which finally buckled. The door was jammed, but they managed to scramble out the window. It was not fatal, but it could have been. The next day, Jane fell off her balcony at Hymenides. At first I joked and told everybody that she'd fallen for me, but it wasn't funny. Her back was broken, and so was our relationship. Someone said that it was no accident, that Jane had gone a little crazy. Whatever the reason, she was spending too much time inside her head, and that was a bad neighborhood. There is one more thing to clear up. Some people say that I had sex with Jane Mason. Other people say that I did not have sex with Jane Mason. Are you familiar with the expression kiss and tell? Well then, here's the truth. Yes. Yes, I kissed Jane Mason, and no, I will not tell you what happened that time she climbed in the balcony of my room at the Hotel Ambos Mundos and found me lying there with a great big Never you mind what she found. Now, aside from Jane Mason and aside from my writing, people have asked me why I live in Cuba. They must be local, huh? But one of the reasons is my home. Finca Vahia. It means lookout farm. 10 full acres of cool colonial tile and stucco, and a great big freshwater pool all surrounded with orchids and hibiscus, and 18 different kinds of mangoes. God, I love mangoes. But so did every kid in the little town of San Francisco de Paula. And they seemed to think it was open season on my mangoes. They stole so many, there were none left for me. When I asked around, I found out there were no sports for the kids to play. They stole out of boredom. Oh, they'd love to play baseball, but they were too poor to afford the equipment. So that's when I decided to sponsor a team. I got them sweaters, hats, gloves, bats, and balls, and we formed a real team. We named it after my son, Gig, and we called them the Giggy All-Stars. Pretty soon, my favorite automobile had been commandeered as the official team vehicle. And I drove them any place we could scrounge a game, with bats, gloves, and 9 or 10 kids draped over the sides. We made quite a sight. And you know what? I loved every minute of it. By the way, from then on, I got to eat all the mangoes I wanted. When I wasn't eating mangoes and when I wasn't driving all those kids around, I like to get some real exercise in that big freshwater pool of mine. And when I had company, they liked to swim too, especially Ava Gardner. You remember, she liked to swim naked. When she did, the word spread pretty fast. Amazingly, all the bushes in the pool area seemed to grow eyes. Sometimes you'd hear a rustle and somebody would stumble and fall, and the next thing you knew, 20 people went charging off through the bushes. Ava never seemed to mind, but I did. I liked my privacy. Earlier in my Key West house, I had to build a wall to keep the tourists out. Toby Bruce helped me build it, The goddamn Federal Emergency Relief Agency had produced a tourist map. And I was ranked number 18 on it. Right behind Johnson's Tropical Grove. But just ahead of the lighthouse in the aviary. Now, I couldn't even go outside without getting run over by some little old lady on a bicycle. The final insult, though, was when the local tourist apartments started advertising their rooms with a view of Ernest Hemingway. So much for standing naked on your own balcony. It was Shine Forbes who came up with the solution. Shine was a local boxer who used to spar with me. One day, when the bell seemed to ring every 2 minutes, Shine marched out to the tourists at the gates and said, "I's Ernest Hemingway. What you folks want?" Well, when the shock wore off, someone said, "But you're a Negro." "That's right," Shine said. "I's Negro, I's Ernest Hemingway, and I's here to tell you about this FIBU wall." "What's an FIBU wall?" someone asked. "I'll tell you what an FIBU wall is," Shine said. Then he picked up a rusty old shotgun from behind the wall and pointed it right at them. "If I be you, I'd move my sorry ass away from this wall before I get the seat of my pants peppered with buckshot." Well, Shine wasn't here for a repeat performance, so I settled for locking the gate and 5 rows of barbed wire. There is one more reason why I live in Cuba, and it's the main reason. It is a big, light blue river called the Gulf Stream. It's 3/4 to a mile deep and 60 to 80 miles wide. It's just minutes from the door of my home across beautiful countryside. And under calm conditions, it provides the best fishing I have ever known. Now, don't get me wrong. I grew up fishing for trout in northern Michigan, and I loved it. But deep sea fishing is something totally different. All it took was that first tail-dancing tarpon rising up out of the water like some silver dream, gill plates rattling and jaws shaking the hook. But I was the one who was hooked. This was not trout fishing. This was enough to make a man forget about trout fishing. When I didn't go fishing, I like to try all the bars in Havana. One of my favorites was El Floridita. In the beginning, El Floridita was not a tourist trap, and I was not like Orson Welles trumpeting his arrival into the Grand Hotel. It was just a nice bar where I knew the staff and could drink with my family and friends. Occasionally, somebody would recognize me. They'd rush out to buy a copy of one of my books and ask me to autograph it. I'd ask them if there was something special they wanted written, and if there wasn't, I'd just make up something funny and sign it. "Keep your pecker up, Ernest Hemingway." There were no fights and very few scenes at El Floridita. What scenes there were usually ended when I whispered something into the troublemaker's ear. Then they'd turn white and leave. I whispered into their ear to stop a fight before it started. That way you didn't spoil your dinner, and there was no lawsuit. I'll leave it up to you to guess what I whispered. When we didn't eat at El Floridita, sometimes I'd make reservations for a feast at a Chinese restaurant called El Pacifico. It was on the top floor of a 5-story building. To get there, you had to go up in an old elevator with a sliding iron grill for a door. You know the kind I mean. This elevator stopped at every floor, whether you wanted it to or not. On the second floor, there was a 5-piece Chinese orchestra blaring out some crazy chaotic music, atonal. This either put you in a Far Eastern mood or gave you a headache, depending on how long the elevator stopped there. Next, you reach the third floor. This was the house of ill repute. Yes, that ill repute. The girls smiled and waved at you, especially if the boys were with me. No, we did not go in. The fourth floor was an opium den, filled with pathetic, wasted little people curled around their pipes. They were oblivious to everything. Finally, by the time you got to the top, you'd forgotten all about eating. That's when I'd re-stimulate the boys' appetites. I'd tell them all about the great meals I'd had on my trip to China, how I had eaten steaming monkey brains, oozing right out of the monkey's hot skull. That was the good part. It was the snakes in the bottom of the wine jar that bothered me. Bon appetit! There is one more word that still strikes fear into the heart of every man at sea. That word is pirate. Pirates exist, and there are more of them during Depression times. In Havana, at first, I was considered one of the wealthy yacht club set, and my boat, the Pilar, had caught the eye of many a pirate after her first visit. There's no doubt that she seemed fair game to the rough crowd of Havana Harbor, fair game to all those bum boatmen and thieves who prowled the waterfront in their rowboats and skiffs. Some of them even had small motor launches and would try for a bigger prize, like an unsuspecting freighter and its crew. These water pirates were not averse to murder, but they were also famous for their pride and skill. Last year, they held a competition out at the racetrack. The thief who won demonstrated that he was so good that he could steal the shoes off a horse while it was still racing. It wasn't long before the word was out. Get the Pilar. But the word was so far out that some of my friends heard it and tipped me off. For the next few nights, I kept watch on board. After rowing out with a friend, I had the friend row back with a large sack in the stern. It resembled a figure hunched over and going ashore with him. Then I waited, patiently, inside the cabin, listening. Shh! Can you hear that? It's the sound I was waiting for. The gentle dip, dip of muffled oars approaching. Soon, a small boat came alongside in absolute silence. For a moment, all was still. Suddenly, a dark figure rose up on deck, fully silhouetted against the background of cafe lights from the shore. The last thing he heard was the faint click of my Colt 45 as I thumbed back the hammer and there was a splash as he fell overboard. So I picked up a flashlight and shone it slowly over the surface of the water. Nothing. Only a small empty boat drifting slowly out to sea. After that, the word went out again. Stay away from Hemingway's boat! Now, there are 4 things that are necessary for you to become a man like that. You have to plan a trade, write a book, fight a bull, and produce a son. I'm going to take a short break right now. While I'm gone, I want you to choose one of those things and make sure you do it. See you in 10 minutes. And don't be late.
I made that for Carolyn for a takeaway for one of her parties at work. That's the name of it.
Well, I produced 3 sons. How did you make out? Most of all, I enjoyed the summers. That's when my sons came fishing with me, all 3 of them. Jack, who did not want to be called Bumby anymore. Patrick, or Mouse, whose very difficult birth gave me the ending for my novel, A Farewell to Arms. And Gregory, my youngest boy, or Gig as we called him. Gig was born to be wicked, but I loved him. He was my son, and I loved him. And I will never forget the time that I had to prove that love. On this particular trip, the morning fishing had been lousy, so after lunch we all decided to go spearfishing right on the edge of the Gulf Stream. And none of that modern stuff with air tanks, just goggles and good old-fashioned homemade spears. Mostly we speared yellowtails and snappers and grunts. Grunts are those funny little ones. When you take them out of the water, they make an almost human sound, a bit like a belch. Most of the fish were harmless and swam in big schools, thousands of them. But sometimes a barracuda would get closer than you wanted. The main danger from cudas came when you entered the water too suddenly. They'd snap at you and run off, but not before stopping and turning to look at you with a piece of your thigh in their mouth. By this time, Gregorio Fuentes was my first mate. He'd take the dinghy partway up from the Pilar and pull the fish off the boys' spears. The 2 older boys were tall enough to touch the reef bottom, but Gig was only 4.5 feet tall. He had to expend a lot of energy just keeping himself afloat. That's when he came up with what he thought was this very clever idea for storing the fish. He unbuckled his belt, put the end through the fish's mouth, pulled it out through the gill, and then rebuckled it. That way he could store 3 or 4 fish before having to make the 50-yard swim back to the dinghy. After he'd caught 4 grunts, he suddenly noticed there wasn't another fish in sight. How could that many fish disappear that fast? And he saw why. 3 huge sharks, each more than 18 feet long, were coming towards him in a slow S-shaped curve. The scent of the fish blood was calling him. Gig screamed uncontrollably, more terrified than he'd ever been in his whole life. Even over the sound of the waves, I heard him. "What is it, Gig?" "Sharks! Sharks!" he cried. 3 big ones. "Okay, pal. Take it easy," I said. "Throw something at them to get their attention and swim to me." He pulled the grunts off his belt and tossed them towards the sharks. Now, Gig had never been much of a swimmer, but this time he set a new record in getting to me. I hoisted him up on my shoulders, which were barely out of the water with his weight, and started thrashing towards the dinghy. It was my body that was under the surface. The sharks would get me first, not him. Sure, I was scared, but I had to save him. Gig snuck a look back over his shoulder and saw the sharks devour the grunts. Then they turned and started towards us again. Finally, I made it to the edge of the dinghy. Gregorio pulled Gig in, and then they both hauled me aboard just at the exact second when that first shark slapped up against the side of the boat. Phew. Later, when Gig told me about the dead fish on his belt, I gave him one hell of a bawling out. But it didn't matter. my boy was alive, and he knew that I cared. I don't know what I'd do if I lost one of my sons. Do you? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus presents the biggest, the best, the greatest show on earth. Whenever the circus came to town, I felt just like a little kid. All I wanted to do was play with the animals, especially the lions. And later, when I got to know the lion tamer, he let me work the big cats. I did it because it was fun. It was fun to see how they reacted to discipline without provocation. But you couldn't work more than 2 of them at once, because a third one could get behind you. And that was dangerous. You know, the same damn thing applies to some people I know. Anyway, when I wasn't working the big cats, I liked to play with the bears. I'd speak to them in Ojibwe. Well, they seemed to understand me. The most interesting time I ever had with a bear, though, was when this very large, cocky black bear escaped from the circus. He made life miserable for everyone by standing right there in the middle of the road and refusing to budge when cars came by. It got so bad that no one could use the road. When I heard about him, I got in my car and drove down that road to seek him out. Suddenly, sure enough, there was the bear, a really big bear. He was standing up on his hind legs with his upper lip pulled back in a sneer. I got out of the car and walked over to him. Do you realize that you're nothing but a miserable common bear? Why, you sad son of a bitch! How can you be so cocky as to stand there and block traffic when you're nothing but a miserable bear? And a black bear at that, not even a polar or a grizzly or anything worthwhile. I really laid it on him. And that poor bear began to hang his head. Then he lowered himself down on all fours, and pretty soon he walked off the road. I had destroyed him. You see, that bear was a bully. And bullies have to be put in their place, so there. There's one animal, however, that you do not fool with. The fighting bull. Because I love bullfighting, I would often go to Pamplona and Madrid, and sometimes my souvenirs ended up on the wall of a Havana bar, like these banderillas. A bullfight has 3 acts. The picadors on horseback at the beginning, and the muleta, or cape and sword, at the end. But in the middle is the planting of the banderillas. 2.5-foot colored darts with harpoons at the end. You hold them at arm's length, and when the sun hits their steel points, it catches the bull's eye. Sometimes you can trick him by taking a false step, like this. Ha, ha, ha! Oh, and then you get the hell out of the way. One time, Grant Mason and I got an entire suburb of Havana cockeyed drunk on the finest vintage brandy in the world. Grant had discovered a new way of drinking called carburation. It was based on the same principle of carburation as used in a gasoline engine. But you needed a really good mix, such as a fine brandy, and Grant had it. That week, he had purchased 5 dozen cases at a salvage auction. Each label bore the legend, Castillon Cognac. Today, I am going to teach you the secret of carburation. But first, a little demonstration from our very willing volunteers. Volunteers, if you will, please come forward and take your glasses as quickly as possible. And I want the rest of you to pay very close attention. Are you ready? Oh, sorry, I can only use 3 volunteers. Thank you very much. Valiant effort. We'll look and make sure this volunteer gets something later. Now, these 3, are you ready? Good, then raise your glasses. And all together now, take a large mouthful, but don't swallow it. Swish it around in your mouth and hold it. Now, exhale through your nose. Completely deflate your lungs and hold it. Don't breathe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Without breathing, swallow it. Now open wide and breathe. You sound like a school of dying porpoises. Don't laugh. It's your turn now. Please distribute the drinks to our friends. Make sure this lady gets one. Hurry up now. Get your drinks. Get your drinks. There's not enough for everyone, so get yours as fast as you can. Normally, for this purpose, I like to use a fine 7-year-old Havana Club. Unfortunately, you can't buy it in this country. Fortunately, I personally delivered this from Havana, Cuba. This is the real thing you're getting, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy. Hurry. Hey, no cheating there. You wait for the rest of us. What a lush. Hurry up now, get your drinks, get your drinks. Hurry up, we're running out of time as quickly as possible. And thank you, volunteers. That's all the time we have. Please wait at the side. Ladies and gentlemen, wait for it. Another lush. Raise your glasses. All together now. Take a large mouthful, but don't swallow it. Swish it around in your mouth and hold it. Now, exhale through your nose. Completely deflate your lungs and hold it. Don't breathe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Without breathing, swallow it. Now, open wide and breathe, deep as you can. Well, congratulations and welcome to the School for Dying Porpoises. Thank you, volunteers. Please return to your seats. Hey, aren't those volunteers great? Let's give them a big round of applause. Afterwards, Grant and I decided to share this technique with the honest fishermen of Hymenides. That night, we knocked on every rickety door in town, and many a fisherman was weaned on $200 cognac as he learned the art of carburation. Now that you know the secret, I entrust you to go forth and spread this technique throughout the entirety of the known world. Salute! It wasn't all drinking and partying. In 1942, the Pilar went to war. We turned her into a Q-boat and started patrolling the waters off the north coast of Cuba. This was anti-sub work under the authority of naval intelligence. Disguised as a scientific research vessel, the Pilar had $3,500 worth of radio equipment stowed inside the head. Now, That meant there was no room for anything else. So the actual head was whatever way you could manage to hang your behind over the side. We also had machine guns and bazookas and high explosives, all disguised as something else. The plan was to maneuver ourselves into a position where we would be hailed and ordered alongside by a surface U-boat. That's when we would drop the bomb. The bomb was a heavy, coffin-shaped explosive device with handles. The idea was to throw it right down the conning tower of the sub and, with luck, get the hell out of the way before it blew up and landed on top of you. Surprisingly, some people, including my third wife, Martha Gellhorn, thought this was a really dumb idea. I still think it would have worked, but we never got close enough to find out. We did, however, send in good information on those U-boat locations, and we were credited by naval intelligence when they later located and sank several Nazi subs. Got decorated for that one. Gregorio Fuentes was with me on this adventure. I tried to explain to him the dangers involved, that the Pilar was no match for any U-boat that wanted to blast her. But he didn't want to hear any of that. He was still very happy to go. You see, we were insured for $10,000 a man, and Gregorio had never figured he was worth that much money. Oh, another time when the boys were with me, we received a message from naval intelligence directing us to investigate a large cave on the coast. German subs were rumored to be using it as a supply depot. A cave as big as Mammoth, Kentucky, stacked full of fuel and sausages and sauerkraut and great Bavarian beer. Well, it wasn't hard finding a cave. In fact, it seemed to be a local tourist attraction. A small boy gladly took us there. It was an enormous underground dome that narrowed down into a dark tunnel. So narrow that only Gig could fit through. Remembering the sharks, I told him to be careful. And off he went. Then we waited. Finally, when he came back, he had a great big grin across his face. In his hands were 4 empty beer bottles. He was absolutely convinced that he'd found a secret German supply depot. Then, his brother examined a bottle with a flashlight. At the bottom, in small print, was a simple inscription: genuine German beer, imported by Joseph Stein & Sons, Hackensack, New Jersey. So much for the secret German base. After the war, I finally completed The Old Man and the Sea, and I was almost killed in a plane crash in Africa. In 1954, for one or both of those things, I was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. This is a part of what I said. Writing at its best is a lonely life. A true writer should always try for something that has never been done. Then sometimes, with great luck, we will succeed. It is because we have had such great writers in the past that a writer is driven far out, past where he can go, out to where no one can help him. I dedicated my Nobel Prize medal to the fishermen of Kohima. Although I had told the story of an old man and his fish to the whole world. It is their story, and they should share this medal. A medal is worn close to the heart, and my heart is in Cuba. The good people of Cuba have taken me into their hearts and caused me to live here longer than I have lived anywhere else. This is my true home. Later, after a ceremony at the Modelo Brewery, I traveled with the medal near Santiago de Cuba and entered the church. There in the Alcobra Sanctuary, I knelt at the feet of the patron saint of Cuba and deposited the medal. Silently, I prayed for the protection, the peace, and the prosperity of the warm, friendly, generous people of Cuba. In Cuba, the people accepted me unconditionally. I could breathe and be happy. It is my clean, well-lighted place. Yeah. Do you like animals? Well, you know I do. That's why I had so many dogs and cats. One of my favorites was a big old black dog with no name other than that, just Black Dog. Years ago, this dog jumped into my car near Sun Valley and decided to stay permanently. I think he regarded himself as a watchdog's watchdog. When I slept, he watched the entrance door. When I swam, he guarded the pool. And when I ate, well, he ate too. As he grew older, his eyesight started to go. So he learned to track lizards by smell instead of by sight. But he was getting older. And then one day he just lay down and went to sleep. He never woke up. I didn't think I'd ever get over a black dog. At least not until Machacos came along. Machacos was a police dog, a young shepherd. We named him after a little town in Kenya because he was so brave, just like a lion. Machacos hated the local police and the military and liked to chase them. What worried me, though, was his inability to distinguish between the regular army and the Salvation Army. And then, like Black Dog, I lost Machacos. A Batista search party looking for guns and rebels came barreling in here in the middle of the night. Machacos charged out to the gate. He knew it was his job to defend the finca, but a soldier clubbed him to death with the butt of his rifle. Machacos, he was too young to die. I miss him. I miss him the same way I miss Black Dog. I miss him in the early morning when I work. He's not there lying on the kudu skin next to my typewriter. I miss him in the afternoon when I swim and he's not hunting lizards beside the pool. Most of all, I miss him in the evening when I sit in my chair and read. And his chin is not resting on my foot. I miss Machacos as much as I miss any friend I ever lost. So let's drink a toast. To Batista, hijo de puta! And that's when I knew it was time for a change in Cuba. The change happened but I wasn't there. When I returned from a trip to Spain and Idaho, the revolution was over. I was so glad that Batista was gone that I kissed the Cuban flag. I kissed it for the people of Cuba and for all the hard-working fishermen who deserved a better life. Black Dog and the Chocolates were dead. Now it was my turn. The same black-ass depression that had killed my father was crippling me. So my last wife, Mary, took me to the Mayo Clinic twice. And that's where the doctors proceeded to kill me. You barely notice the bars on the windows. They applied a barbaric technique called electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. They didn't understand it then. And they still don't. But it did keep you quiet. I felt just like poor Machaca's about to be clubbed to death with the butt of a rifle. They strapped me to a table. The electrodes were attached to my head on both sides. The gag was placed in my mouth. It was a special cloth, hand rolled by the nurse, so I wouldn't bite my tongue off. And then the needle, an anesthetic, so I would not feel. Slowly, the doctor turned the black dial on the black machine. Once, twice, again. When I came to, I remember nothing, absolutely nothing. But that wasn't good enough. So he did it 10 more times. Mary took me back to Idaho. But it was no good there. I was already dead. I could not feel, I could not remember. I could not write. I could not write! Like Santiago, I had gone further out than any man had ever gone. But for me, there was no way back. On July 2nd, 1961, I checked and made sure that Mary was sleeping. At 7:30 in the morning, I took out my favorite Scott shotgun, put 2 shells in the chambers, stepped into the vestibule at the side of the house, quietly closed the door. I placed the barrels in my mouth, felt the steel potence of the triggers. I had practiced this 100 times. But as my fingers tightened, I remembered the question a young boy had asked his father a long time ago in Michigan. Is dying hard, Daddy? No, son, he said. I think it's pretty easy. It all depends. And then I remembered Paris, Spain, lions playing on the beach in Africa, all the people I loved. Most of all, I remembered Cuba. The old fisherman is all alone now. I know they have destroyed me, but they cannot defeat me. Goodbye, my Cuba. Goodbye, my son. extend a very large thank you to the Tropic Cinema for hosting me. They've been a wonderful host. And before I let you escape, I want to make 3 invitations. First of all, in June of this year, on the 19th, I want all of you to be at the Hemingway Colloquium in Havana. Be there. It was today, actually, that your travel restrictions were eased a bit. You can do this. You can do this. By the way, they're showing a new documentary film. I pray it's finished. It's going to be called Hemingway II, and I'll leave it to your imagination who it's about. Your next invitation is in the summer, of course. It's the Hemingway Festival here, and I want to point out some dates. Normally it's held on the 3rd weekend, but because of where January 21st falls this year, it's actually going to start in that next week and go through to the following weekend, which is ultimately the 4th weekend in July. So if you live here, you have no excuse for attending the events. If you don't live here, fly back soon. The third invitation is for December the 5th at the Hemingway Estate in Cuba. Some of you know that I'm the patron of the Hemingway Children's Baseball team, the one I talked about in the play tonight. We revived it a few years ago. 2 years ago, thank you. 2 years ago, we reestablished the Christmas holiday tradition that Ernest did in the 40s when he invited the children to his house. He gave each child $1 and told them a Christmas story. So we set up the same thing. We had 45 kids. We gave them $1. I told them a Christmas story. And we also threw in 60 uniforms of hats, sweaters, and pants, and some additional equipment. This year we just did it, and there are a few people in this room who were actually there the day I was doing it. Instead of 45 kids from the previous year, we had 85 kids, and they all got their $1, and your honorary mayor, Sammy Mays, has done a Christmas variation of the night before Christmas called the Pirate Night Before Christmas. So she sent 85 copies to Canada, because at that time she couldn't send it herself from here, and I carried it all from Canada, went through, and they searched my luggage for pornography. It was wonderful. They opened all the Christmas books and they started reading the stories. I gave them the Spanish translation. Next thing I knew, I had the entire staff booked on the Pirate Night Before Christmas, and they let me close my bag and deliver them to the children. We also had a dozen of the lookalikes from the Lookalike Society down there. So each year it's getting bigger. So December 5th next year, exhibition game with the kids and the Christmas holiday story tradition, gift giving, and you can bring a gift. Also, I want you to start thinking about this. The next thing is to bring those kids to Key West and send one of our teams to Havana. A baseball exchange with the children. And maybe we'll end the embargo at the same time. Who knows? Who knows? Now, one last thing. I have to tell you about a dream I had last night. Some people know this dream. But I was standing at a crossroads. In the middle of the road stood an old whore. Her name was Death. She pointed a bony finger at me and said, "Your time has come. You must choose one of these 2 roads according to what you deserve." One road led to heaven. The other led to hell. Well, I couldn't choose, not without seeing the place where I was going to spend eternity. So first we went to hell. There, seated in a long row, were a lot of writers that I didn't recognize. They were chained to their desks, and they were typing. Blood was dripping from their fingers. Flames roared everywhere. Demons stood over them, whipping them, lashing them. Blood poured down their backs. This is horrible, I said. Get me out of here. For God's sake, show me the other place. Instantly, the old whore transported me to heaven. There, chained to their desk, were William Shakespeare, Charles Dickens, Leo Tolstoy. Believe it or not, even James Joyce was there. Everything was exactly the same. Blood dripping, flames roaring, demons whipping. What is this? What's going on, I asked. This heaven looks exactly like hell. Ah, yes, said the whore. But in heaven, you get published. That's your final invitation. I've just been published, and a few of the books are here. Make sure you get a copy, and I'll be out in a few minutes to do a signing with you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure playing.